Ravindran, Mr. Shah, my dear friend Rajdeep, Mr. Sanjay Joshi, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the Observer Research Foundation and you, Sanjay, for organizing this morning on a rather contentious subject. I think the first question that we need to ask ourselves is, why does this question keep coming back again and again? Why is it that the courts, starting from the Bengal Cricket Association case to the Sahara matter, to the Indraprastha matter, routinely observe on various aspects of media behavior? Why do thinking sections of society assemble such a galaxy of eminences on a Tuesday morning to apply themselves to this issue if it would not be of concern? And why, despite inheriting our political system from our erstwhile imperial masters, the Westminster system of democracy, was there ever no serious debate about the Levinson report in India? Why was it that we just chose to sweep it under the carpet completely? And that brings us to the second question, that are there aberrations in the media space? And the answer is yes. Are those aberrations alarming enough to warrant a regulatory intervention more than what exists already? I do not know. And if at all it warrants an intervention, then what should be the nature of that intervention? The constitutional position, as has been articulated by three very eminent former judges, I think is extremely clear. 19(1)(a) caveated by 19(2), and then 19(g) caveated by 19(6). But do 19(1)(a) and 19(1)(g) really operate in different spheres? While it would be incumbent upon the government or parliament to be extremely careful about the kind of restrictions that they impose on 19(1)(a), would that same care, caution and circumspection apply to the restrictions which are imposed on 19(1)(g) in terms of 19(6)? In Maneka Gandhi's case, the court held that fundamental rights are not exclusive to each other. They have to be read harmoniously. But then it does raise a question: can the freedom of speech and expression really be confused with the freedom to practice a trade and occupation? And would somebody not be within their reasonable right to impose restrictions insofar as the latter is concerned? So, therefore, I think, given the exponential nature in which this sector has evolved, there are extremely profound questions which we need to apply ourselves to. What is the media landscape today? You have 80,000 odd newspapers and publications, 86,754 as of the 31st of March 2012. We need to update our own RNI website because I couldn't get the latest figures. 852 television channels, and with all due respect to Justice Ravindran, we give licenses in the news and the non-news category. So it's a violation if some non-news channel actually carries news or vice versa. So the compartmentalization is extremely clear. You have 415 news channels, and the rest of them are general entertainment or non-news channels, and that's how the licensing architecture is structured. There are, as we speak, about 86.7 crore mobile phones in this country, out of which there are about 3.8 crore smartphones. The reason why I mention smartphones is because of the exponential growth in the internet over the last 15 years. And then you have the entire paradigm of films. Films as of today reach about 45 million people. They should be reaching really 300 million or at least 1.2 billion people. But films also have a huge impact on mass media, or rather people's perceptions and behaviors. Bollywood at the last count, was about $3.1 billion, according to some study done by the Danish industry. Our own studies put it much higher. So therefore, you have an extremely vibrant and an extremely diverse and an evolving landscape. And in this landscape over the last 15 years, you had the invention of the internet. The net, which emanated out of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, was possibly the most audacious experiment with anarchy, and it has succeeded. The internet today represents the largest ungovernable space in history. Never before in the history of mankind has so much power been available to so many people at the click of a button. Since 2003, more digital data is created every 2 days than it happened between the advent of civilization in 2003. So it's a tale of two parallel civilizations. A physical civilization which has emerged over the millennia, and a virtual civilization which is evolving. And eventually, I think the larger question which nobody has applied himself to is that would there be a clash of these two civilizations, or would they be able to exist in harmony? Because eventually, the entire information explosion has changed the nature of state, the nature of revolution, the nature of counter-revolution, terrorism, reconstruction, rehabilitation as we know it. And unfortunately, I think, and this comes to me again and again, then when we debate media regulations, are we trying to really debate a subject of the past? Are we trying to debate the power balance of 1945 in 2013? And then the converse argument is equally true, that by offering this very simplistic explanation that there has been this huge democratization of the information space, are we trying to escape from the reality of the day? That is, do you require a modicum of a regulatory architecture superimposed on the space as it exists today? And to some extent, that is correct, because as Justice A.P. Shah was pointing out, Justice Karju alluded to it, Justice Ravindran also was very candid and forthright to say it up front. In the Indian context, Article 21 does guarantee us certain rights. The right to privacy, the right against slander, the right to a free trial. And unfortunately, what we've seen, and I say it with the greatest regret that over the past decade and a half, we have seen some of these rights, or most of these rights, being trampled upon and trifled with. I'm absolutely one with the media when they say that Section 499 and 500 should be removed from the Indian Penal Code. I would be the first person to recommend that there should not be criminal penal provisions with regard to defamation. But I think concurrently, the tort of civil defamation has to emerge. And there have to be compensatory damages which are appropriate and adequate in order to correct a wrong or a harm which is caused. And I think to some extent the judgment in Justice Samant's matter has to some extent shown the way. I am somebody who came to this job having looked at the front end of the media for 5 years. I was a card-carrying member of the blood sport which takes place between 8 and 10 p.m. every night on national television. And as a very proud and conscientious member of the Tower of Babel, what concerns me at times and anguishes me is when that Tower of Babel converts itself into the Tower of London and people are hung, drawn and quartered without even a trial. The spectator of media trials which Justice Shah was referring to. Now, when I talk to the broadcasters, they blame it on the tyranny of the TRPs. However, if you look at the converse argument, when TAM tries to broad-base itself, Prasar Bharati comes and tells me that the broadcasters threaten to walk out because they do not want TAM to go into suburban India. They want TAM to remain in metro India. I do not know for whatsoever reasons. And if TAM and TRP is really the culprit, I fail to understand why the industry has not moved on the creation of a broadcast audience research council. And for the life of me, as Justice Karju was saying, I have the greatest respect and I hold in the greatest esteem some of our editors and journalists who I think have done an extremely fine job. And when they talk to me privately, and I ask them, I said, doesn't the nature of the discourse really trouble you at times? So the stock answer is, kya kare TRP? So if TRP is the problem, then we should have moved far quicker to the Broadcast Audience Research Council, because if government would do something, then we would be accused of playing Big Brother. And the BARC is entirely an industry body. In fact, often I reflect onto myself that when we did digitization, or we started on the process of digitization, I think we should have made a provision, and as we speak, government has been trying to work on that, to see as to how every set-top box can be turned into a people's meter. So therefore, the size of the sample gets so enlarged that it starts reflecting the 15.5 crore television households which constitute this universe. Because as we go along, I do not think it is in anybody's interest, neither in the interest of the media, nor in the interest of society, nor in the interest of anybody who has an administrative role, to really have a very corrosive debate. I completely agree with the industry when they come and complain that there are very stressed revenue models in the industry. In fact, the ministry has been extremely sympathetic on the whole question of ad caps, especially with regard to the news channels. But then again, I recall when on the 29th of October I came to this job. On 31st of October was the deadline for implementing the first phase of digitization. There was a lot of pressure on us to relax the deadline. It had been relaxed twice earlier. But we stayed the course. We went through digitization in 3 metros. We went through phase 2 of digitization, which covered 38 major cities. And today, people may say that carriage has not come down to the extent we expected. People may say that subscriber revenue has not started kicking back in the volume that we expected it to kick back. But is there anybody who can stand up and say today that their balance sheets in August 2013 are not looking better than their balance sheets in the October of 2012? And then, to a larger, more philosophical question, can stressed revenue models really be the excuse for private treaties, paid news, other methods of augmenting revenue, which have unfortunately come to hold in the larger media space? I think these are issues that the industry seriously needs to reflect upon. The question is then, where do we go from here? As Justice Ravindran was pointing out, we have a model where there is self-regulation. You have the BCCC in the non-news area. You have the NBSA in the news area. You have ASCI in the advertising area. We have a statutory regulator in the Press Council. And then you have the government as the licensor. And we do it through the Cable Television Networks Regulation Act, insofar as broadcasting is concerned, and the Ministry of Information Technology does it through the IT Act, insofar as the net is concerned. Now, this model may be clumsy, but this model, has worked. So therefore, the question that we need to ask ourselves is, do we refine this model? Do we remove the anomalies which are intrinsic to this model? Or do we then really look for a new model? Because, as Justice Ravindran and Justice Shah were saying, that why can't we make it mandatory that every news channel should be a member of the NBSA? Or every non-news channel should be a member of the IDF or the NBA, because out of the NBA flows the News Broadcasting Standards Authority of India, and out of the Indian Broadcasting Foundation flows the BCCC. Well, we can do that. We've done that in the case of ASCI. We have given statutory status to the ASCI code in the Cable Television Networks Regulation Act. But the question would be, suppose if the industry body splits tomorrow, suppose the NBA splits into 2 or into 3, or the IBF splits into 4, where does that leave the self-regulatory bodies then? So are we then going to have 3 or 4 self-regulatory mechanisms in each genre? And if we have to find a solution around that, which strengthens the paradigm of self-regulation, then I think, we need to collectively, and I say that because government does not want to impose regulation on the media in any form. But we need to think these models through. Because there are 5 paradoxes in the media space. The first paradox, which I say, is the paradox of the short fuse. While over the years, the elements of information dissemination or instruments of information dissemination have proliferated. Today, every person on Twitter is a broadcaster in his own right. Every person on Facebook is a broadcaster in his own right. Our ability to be able to absorb an alternative view has gone down. Corresponding to the increase of instruments of information dissemination is the declining graph of tolerance. So how do we address this? That as a country and as a society, we are able to accommodate an alternative view. And then of course, the paradigm or the paradox of the TRP qua the truth. The paradox of flawed revenue models and questionable methods of revenue augmentation. The media trial, qua fair trial. And of course the question of statutory regulation, qua self-regulation. I think these are the 5 paradoxes of the media space on which we need to find a golden mean. Insofar as the UPA government is concerned, when I came into this job, my Prime Minister told me one thing very clear, that the philosophy of the UPA is that our relationship with the media must be an essay in persuasion and never ever be an essay in regulation. And I think that has underscored the past 9 years of our administration of this country. And my own personal experience, when I was the lawyer for Tehelka and the Venkateswamy Commission, when the predecessor government was trying to run a website and its promoters into the ground, it gave me a sense as to how fragile media freedoms are and how easy it is for a state to really use its might to drive an uncomfortable media into the ground. And notwithstanding whatever may have been the criticism which may have been hurled at us as a government, I don't think in the past 9 years anyone can point a single instance where there has been systematic persecution of the media by the UPA government, where all instrumentalities were brought to bear in order to run somebody out of business or to prosecute their relatives. So, while I once again would like to congratulate Sanjay for organizing this debate, I would like to leave you with a last thought. You know, technology is a great leveler. The internet has democratized the entire information space. Earlier it was only politicians who were subject to constituency pressure. Now even very eminent editors are subject to the pressure of their followers on Twitter and Facebook. They have their own individual constituencies which at times they feel compelled to respond to. I think that's a given because that's the nature of the evolution of the entire information paradigm. But we take one thing for granted. And the one thing that we take for granted is that the World Wide Web will stay as the World Wide Web. I think that's the notion that we are taking for granted. Increasingly, you will see that states will start asserting their Westphalian entity and try and make the virtual space correspond to their physical reality. So, you will have a China net. You know, already you have the phenomenon of the Weibo, the Chinese Twitter. You may have a Shia net tomorrow, a Sunni net, and a net which is wedded to Anglo-Saxon values. So therefore, the balkanization of the net today, as we speak, can be as much a reality in our lifetime as the creation, invention, and the proliferation of the World Wide Web. So therefore, while we apply ourselves to the question of self-regulation or statutory regulation, I think some of these larger issues, which are going to be the issues of tomorrow, should also, because the Observer Research Foundation is a futuristic think tank, I think it will be worth their while to consider all this and take it within their purview. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, and especially to you, Sanjay, thank you very much for inviting me, for giving me a chance to share my views.